Right, so this is 755, the safety key, or you may have 655, whatever handout that you work from, but it's the safety key drawing. So what we're going to do, we want to make sure dimension layer is current. So go ahead and change the dimension layer to make it current. And make sure ortho is on. We may have to take it off in some cases, especially if we have to manipulate some of those dimensions. You also want to have O-snap on. And just to review, whenever you're in AutoCAD and you want to see this menu here, if yours ever goes away, this menu is this little arrow, and you'll go down and show menu bar or hide menu bar. Mine went away because I had a different setting on it last time I used it. So to get to dimension style, there's several different ways. Remember, the first time I had you come to the format pull down menu and do a dimension style. You can come over here to the annotate and choose dimension style in here. It'll be this one. And then you can also toggle over to the annotate taskbar up here at the top, and you can scroll down here on that little arrow and choose dimension style in here. So we have lots of ways we can get to dimension style to change it. We don't really need to change, but I want you to go in there so you can see the ANSI standards. So format dimension style, or click on it on one of those buttons. You can also type in, if you look at my command bar down here, it says dim style, D-I-M-S-T-Y-L-E. You can type that in the command bar and it will bring up this style manager as well. So if we want to go to modify, and we've already changed everything in our template, but this is just to show you. Remember when we went in, we changed the extend on dimension lines as 1/8 of an inch. That was an ANSI standard. Our baseline spacing is already at 0.38 or 3/8 of an inch. So that's an ANSI standard. The offset from the origin, so the distance between the part and the extension line, 0.0625, that's an ANSI standard. So all of these things that we changed because it's an ANSI standard. The arrow size, we changed to 0.125. The break in between the dimension line and the number was 0.125. We didn't have to change that one because it was already in there as a standard. The text height, 0.125. The units, we did change to 2 decimal place. We suppressed this leading 0 because we're in inches. And if I uncheck that, you can see that it puts the 0 before the decimal place right here in this radius. I don't want that because I'm in inches and not metric. So I'm suppressing the leading 0. That means it's not going to show it. Now, if I was in metric, then I would suppress the trailing 0. So I would click that one and uncheck that one. Okay. So what I have here is what we need. We don't need to change anything. I'm just showing you. And if you wanted to display both metric and English units, you can just check this box here. And the multiplier for the units, there's 25.4 millimeters in an inch. So that would be your multiplier to show the metric equivalent. All right. So there are different things that we can change. We changed them because it was an ANSI standard, and now we know those ANSI standards. So I'm just closing out, and we're going to go ahead and make these dimensions. So for just a second, I'm going to toggle back over and get this up here. I'm going to take a snippet of it and put it in AutoCAD so I don't have to keep going back and forth. You can do this as well if you want to. I'm just using the standard snipping tool that's in PC or Windows-based programs, and I'm just doing new. putting a box around it. I'm going to do edit copy, just minimizing these things, and then coming back into AutoCAD, I'm going to do an edit paste, and it will paste it right in here so I can see it while I'm drawing. So if you want to do that, you can. It saves a little time so you don't have to go back and forth. Notice it came in as a dimension layer because I had my dimension layer current. So if I wanted to keep that in there, you know, say you've got a company logo or something you want to keep in, then you might want to make sure you put it in the correct layer before it was printed out. All right, so we're going to follow the dimensions that we have on this isometric and put it on our multi-view. And the way that I tend to do it is pick one spot that I always start at on the drawing, on the isometric, and just go all the way around that object to make sure I have all the dimensions that they have on the original. Okay, you won't always have something that you're drawing based out of a book. You know, eventually you're going to draw things on your own, and you're going to have to reverse engineer parts and find the dimensions. So you're going to have to learn how to place dimensions without having an example. But for now, this is our first example, so we're going to follow what we have. So we only want to put these on here one time, and we want to place them between the views where they apply. Well, this one's pretty complex back in here. We have a lot of dimensions, so we may have to move things around a little bit. So let's start with this 0.4. I'll usually start in this very back corner. You don't have to start there, but that's just what I've always done, and I work my way clockwise around the object till I know that I've gotten everything, and then I end up back in that back corner again so I know that I haven't missed any dimensions. So this 0.4 we're going to make, and it applies to this line here. Okay, so in your taskbar here in this ribbon, we have a kind of a overall dimension that creates multiple types of dimensions. I found that it doesn't always work how you want it to work. So if you go right here on the side, there's different dimensions if you click on that little arrow, and it's going to allow you to choose exactly what dimension you want to use. So I'm going to choose the linear dimension. Okay? And my first click is going to be at the end point of my object. Now I know that 0.4 applies to this line, but I don't want to click on that line, because if I do, or I don't want to click on that end point right here, because if I do, it won't show the gap. The gap will be lost down here at this point. So I'm going to click on this end point because that's the one closest to the outside of the object, and then I'm going to come in here and click on the other side, and then my last click is to set the number. So I'm not really going to measure this, but I know that my first dimension needs to be about 3/8 of an inch away from the part. So I can look at it and say, okay, that's about 3/8 of an inch. And then if I zoom in, you can actually see the gaps. So when you place these dimensions, let's say that you accidentally placed the dimension down here. You know, let's say you clicked on it down here instead of up here. You can see that there's no gap. There's nothing there because my extension line goes over top of my object line. We really don't want that to happen if we can help it. So make sure you're clicking on the outermost line. And you can click on the dimension after you make it and force the dimension to do anywhere you have a grip. It will allow you to move it. So if I wanted to move this up or down, I could click on that grip where the arrow is. If I wanted to force the number inside, I can click on the grip where the number is and force it to go inside. So since that number fits inside, that's my preference, right? I want to keep the number in between the extension lines where possible. So now I have this 0.4 dimension, right? So the next dimension that's in my sequence here is a 0.4 dimension, but this is a height dimension. So I'm going to see that in the front and the right side view. And if I look in my front view, where that's indicated is a hidden line. So what is the rule on dimensioning to hidden lines? We're not supposed to do it, right? So we're not going to place that in the front view. We're going to come over here to the right side view and see that it is indeed visible right here. So we're going to place that dimension here. So we're going to go back up to linear dimension. I'm going to place an endpoint here and here. Now in this case, we're using basically the object line as an extension line. So we do have an extension line over top of our object line, and I'm going to show you how to hide that. Okay, because we don't want two lines on top of each other, and the precedence of line is definitely the object line and not the extension line. So the way that you can hide that, we have like a draw order command in AutoCAD. I can click on this dimension, and then I can right click, and I have some settings that's going to come up. One of those settings is draw order. And then I can say send that to back, send that behind the object line. And then you can no longer see that extension line, so when you print it out, you won't see red ink over black ink trying to do two lines at one time. So in this case, we're using an object line as an extension line, and that's okay. All right. So if we're coming down the list here, we now have this 0.5 diameter circle. So the new standard is a diameter symbol with a number, and AutoCAD will do that for us. All we have to do is come down here where it says linear, hit that little arrow, and it's going to put a diameter or a radius dimension for us. So we're going to click diameter, and we're going to put this in the dimension where we see it as a hole. So we're going to put it where it appears as a circle, and we're going to click on that circle and just drag that out a little ways. We'll end up moving that, I'm sure, but for now that's okay. Now it does have a leader option right here, but we don't want to create a leader on our own. It does it very nicely for us when we use that diameter dimension. So if we had to put a note or something with a leader line, we could create it with that leader command, but it already has a diameter command for us, so we might as well use it. All right, so the next one, if we go down, we could either do this 60 degrees or this 0.76. Let's go ahead and do this angle. Now this is an angle where the dimension is on the object itself. And one of our dimensioning rules was not to dimension on the object. In this case, there's nowhere else that we can place the dimension that it will actually be depicted in the view where we see it as an angle. So we're either violating one rule or the other. In this case, we want to show the dimension where it actually applies, so we're going to put it on the drawing. So if you go up here to where it should say diameter, because that's the last one that we created, it's going to have an angular dimension. So we're going to click on angular, and it allows us to click on both of those lines and create this angle dimension for us. So I don't want to go too far out. I could go this far out, but it's going to be over top of our hidden lines. So you want to keep it where it's not over top of your hidden lines. And if I go out far enough, it does put some extension lines, and it'll still put that gap in there. All right, so now we have the angular dimension. If we come back over, we have this 0.76 dimension that we can create. That is a width dimension, but we see it in both the top and the front view. So we see it from this line over to the tip, and we see it here. So we can put it in either one of those views, but our dimensioning rule is we need to put it in the view or between the views where it applies. So we could actually put it right here in our front view at the top of that, and then it'll be in between the views where it applies. So we're going to go back to linear dimension, and we'll click on this endpoint and this endpoint. And remember, this is one of the first dimensions, so we want to be about 3/8 of an inch off the part. Now I told you we'd probably end up moving this diameter dimension. We want to line these up. We don't want like the diameter dimension to be way over here or anything like that. So we may end up having to move that to line it up. And if you do, and you have ortho on, notice with ortho, it only lets me go back and forth. It'll let me go out, but it's at a crazy angle. So you may want to take ortho off for a little bit so you can line it up. And we want to line it up, basically, line it up with this arrow that we made right here. So those are about the same distance from the part. And another rule was that your leader line can't go straight up and straight down or straight over. So what that means is we can't have a leader line that looks like this, and we can't have a leader line that looks like this. We want to make sure that leader line stays at some angle. The most common angles are 30, 45, 60, 15. All right, now the next thing, we could go ahead and put ortho back on just in case. We can do this 0.44 dimension, which is a height dimension, which we see in the front view and the right side view. And we're going to see it right here along this line. So we're going to go to the linear dimension. We'll just put it in the front view because that's going to be easier than putting extension lines all the way through the part on the right side. But we'll click here and here at these endpoints, and we'll bring it out about 3/8 of an inch off the part. Notice that it threw my number outside. I'm going to try to force that number in the middle and just see what it does. So it forced the number in the middle, and then I just brought it back out to where it's about 3/8 of an inch off the part again. The next dimension that's near there is this 1.12. So we can stack it right with that 0.44. So this is an example of where we're stacking our dimensions where possible. So I'm going to click on this endpoint again and this endpoint and bringing it out. Now the 0.44 and the 1.12 are going to share this extension line now, and that's perfectly acceptable. And we still have our gaps right here, and we have our gap down here. All right, and the next thing would be this 0.7 that we see on this inclined surface. That is a depth dimension, so we see that in the right side view and we see it in the top view. Now in the right side view, this whole surface appears foreshortened. So we really don't want to dimension to a foreshortened surface if possible. We want to dimension where we see it as an inclined surface, so therefore we're going to put it in the top view. So right now we're going to click on linear dimension. We're going to go to this endpoint here where your angle goes into that linear line here, and we're going to put it at the vertex and bring it out. Now we know that this 0.44 was about 3/8 of an inch. Those should be kind of in line with one another. You just eyeball it. You don't have to measure it. But we want to keep them in line and keep everything according to standards. Notice when I force this in here, it just barely has a dimension line there on the bottom. If I take off ortho to move that, it's going to allow me to move it a little bit easier. So, you know, sometimes you might have to manipulate those a little more than other times. So now I have the 0.7. The other one that we have that shows on top of the part is this 1.4 right here. We don't have to put that on the part. Okay, we can line that right up with this 0.7, stack it just like we did with the 1.2 down here. So I'm going to go back to linear dimension. I'm going to click on this endpoint, and just bring it right out here with that 0.7. So in the top view and the front view, these are kind of in line with one another. That's what it means by point-to-point dimension. And we're lining things up with the arrow point from one to the other. All right, the next one, we've got the 1.4. We've got basically all of these. This 0.5 would be a good one to make. That is also a depth dimension. In the isometric, we kind of see it in the top view, but we could also see it in the right side view. It would be the distance from here to here. So if we had to put it in the right side view, we could, but we'd have to put it down here at the bottom. So we're going to place that in the top view. Now, here's something that we can talk about. There's going to be two acceptable ways on this, but I'm going to show you. We're going to use linear dimension, and we're going to choose this endpoint. And we could use the endpoint here and make it kind of like we made this 0.4 where it's closer to the part. Or we could come out here and choose this endpoint and line it up with some dimensions that we already have. Now for this part, it's going to be acceptable, but some instances we really don't want those long extension lines like that. Okay, so we could do it that way, or we could go ahead and make it snap to this corner and bring it down to where it's closer to where it applies. Okay, so in this case, that probably looks a little bit better than that really long extension line, because remember, one of our rules was to not have really long extension lines. Okay, so we're going to leave this dimension like it is, so it's closer to where it applies. Now, we have an extension line over top of our visible line, so remember, in order to send that to the back, we click on it, right click, choose draw order, and say send to back. All right, so we've done all the ones on this back part, and we're moving clockwise through. We're here to 0.5. We have this 0.56. That's a location dimension to the hole. So where do we see the hole as an actual circle? What view? It's going to be the front view, right? So we want to locate the hole where it appears as an actual circle. So any location dimensions we really want to put on this front view, because we're not supposed to dimension to the hidden lines or to the center line that's in the hidden line, because sometimes that can be ambiguous. So we're going to put this 0.56 in our front view, and we're also going to put this 1.38 in our front view, since it is a location dimension for the hole. And we're going to use the linear dimension on both of those. So the 0.56, we can do this in two ways. We could actually put it on top of the object right here in the front view where it applies, or we could put it on this side and drag it out. But again, if we do that, we have this really long extension line, and it goes over top of other geometries. So the best way to do that is to go ahead and put it at this center line, and if you have your perpendicular snap on, it'll snap just right here perpendicular. If not, I mean, you can snap right here at this endpoint. That's the closest endpoint. And it will use the object as an extension line once more. We could force that number on the inside. And again, we have to click on it, right click, choose draw order, and say send to back. So we have the 0.56 on there. That 1.38, it tells us that it's coming from this line to the center. So we can go ahead and put that one on as a linear dimension. For this one, I'm going to click on the endpoint here and the end of that center line here. So remember, your dimensions, they're going to be about 3/8 of an inch off the part. So we're going to consider this one a first dimension. So we're about 3/8 of an inch off the part. And we're going to go ahead and click. Now, this arrow and the number are kind of right there at the same spot. So we could either move that a little bit, or we can move this number. So we can make that number not quite centered in there. And mine is snapping back because of O-snap, so I'm going to take off O-snap just for a minute and force it to go over. So now that's a little bit easier to read because we don't have an arrow right on top of our number. So it's acceptable to do that as well. And I'm going to throw O-snap back on and ortho back on. Now, I haven't showed you guys this, but there are shortcut keys on the keyboard. So if you really like typing in your shortcuts on the keyboard, ortho and O-snap have this F key command. So you can see down on my screen there that F8 is the shortcut for ortho, and F3 is the shortcut for O-snap to toggle that on and off. The next thing will be the 4.7 dimension, that's the overall width, and this 1.12 dimension, that's just the width of this one feature. So those apply to the top view and the front view. So it would probably be best for us to put it in between the views where they apply. So this 4.7 and this 1.12 can be placed up here in between the views where they apply. So we're going to do a linear dimension. We'll do the shorter one first, and we'll take that about 3/8 of an inch off the object, and then we'll do the other one from that same start point, and it will apply down here to the last point on that object, and we're just going to place it right here. So we have about 3/8 of an inch off the part, and then about 1/4 inch after that for the larger dimension. So the smaller dimensions are placed closer to the object, and the larger dimensions are placed further away. So now we're getting to this back side. We have this group of dimensions here, and we'll be done. So the 1.9 dimension is a height, and we see height in the front view and the right side view. So it would be best for us to put that 1.9 dimension in between these two views. Now we have, that's exactly what we're going to talk about. We could put it, we have a point here that we can put it in from the front view, but that's going to leave us a really long extension line. So we're going to put it starting from our right side view. We're going to do a linear dimension, and we're going to choose this endpoint and this endpoint, and we're going to put it right here. Now sometimes it does get a little crowded in here, so if you have to move some of these after you've set them, you can do that. If it toggles back in place, it's probably because of O-snap. But we never really want a bunch of numbers lining up. We would rather move that number up or down than it lining up next to each other, because then it's harder to read. So we could do something like that, and it makes it easier to read. So we've got the height, Now we have the overall depth, and then we have some of these smaller dimensions in here. So it does get a little bit hairy. If you can see, this 0.7 dimension actually goes to the endpoint here, and the 0.5 goes to the smaller line at that endpoint. So we're overlapping an extension line and a dimension line, and we're not really supposed to do that, but in some cases there's just really no good way of putting it on there unless you do overlap. So we really want to put this in the top view where we can see it better, and we don't want to dimension to the hidden lines in the right side view. So it may get a little cramped up here in the top view, but that's okay. So we can start out with the smaller dimensions first. We can do the 1.4 and the 0.5 are lined up because those kind of go together from those endpoints there, and then the 0.7 and the 1 are lined up because that indicates the gap here. The 1 does, and then the 0.7 indicates that endpoint where the gap starts. So those are the reason, or that's the reason why those are lined up. So I'm going to move this back just a little bit to give me some room for my dimensions. And I'm going to start with, let's go ahead and do that 0.7 and that 1. So I'm going to start at this endpoint here and go to this inner point where the 0.7 would apply. And I'm going to have to manipulate it a little bit. I'm going to force the number to be inside for now. And again, you know, I might have to move this later. So for now, I'm going to leave it like it is with the number inside. I'll go ahead and make that 1 dimension. So I'm going to go back to linear, click on that endpoint, click on this point, and I need to line those arrowheads up. So if I move my mouse over top of the endpoint of that arrowhead, it will snap to the endpoint of the arrowhead there. So those are nice and lined up. And now I can make my 0.5 and that 1.4. I could actually do it up here. I'll still end up overlapping something. So it really doesn't matter what you end up overlapping, you're still overlapping. So I'm just going to place them where I see them on the drawing. So I'm going to bring that 0.5 out. You'll notice that my extension line overlaps here. We don't like for that to happen, and I really don't like it since my dimension line doesn't come down past that. So I may want to move my number down a little bit more and force those arrowheads to be on the outside. Or I could actually move the number on the outside too. That might be the best thing because now it looks like that 0.7, it's ambiguous whether it goes with this line or the other line. So I may force that to be out here. However I do it, I still need it to be lined up. So if you take ortho off, you can, it should allow you, it won't let me go to the other side. I was going to put it at the other side, but it's fine. Now let's see. So we'll do it like this. Try to bring that back in a little bit. So ortho and O-snap, when you're manipulating these dimensions, a lot of times you have to move them more than once. And you end up toggling back and forth, turning it on and off. So I really don't like how that's looking, but I may just go ahead and put that 0.5 back in there. I think that's going to be the best that we can get out of this one. And then we have that 1.4 that we have to deal with, so we'll go ahead and choose that endpoint, and we want to line those arrowheads up again. And then the last one, this 2.4, that's the overall depth, so we could actually put that in the right side view if we wanted to, because it would be in between the views where it applies. But since we already have, you know, some of these, we'll go ahead and stack it right here at the top with the others. And probably the best thing to do here is stagger some of those numbers so we don't have them going in line all at the same point. Or maybe this would be better being up here. So again, you're going to be moving these around. You're going to have to take ortho and O-snap off, but in the end you want to still make sure your arrowheads are lined up, especially if you have it like this where one of them is on the outside and one of them's on the inside. You want them to be over top of each other so it doesn't show like there's two arrows there. Okay, and then you can double check, make sure you didn't miss any dimensions. And once you're finished with your dimensions, you can of course get rid of your picture there, but you want to go back over to your layout and make sure that all of your dimensions are showing on your border. Right now I have it locked and it's 1:1 scale because that's what I need it to be. Sometimes you have to change your scale if you have dimensions, but we'll double click inside here and unlock our viewport, and I'm just going to try to hold my middle mouse down and pan it where I can fit this on the screen. When you pan, you're not changing your scale. Like my scale is still 1:1 here, so I'm holding my middle mouse button, which is the wheel, and I'm just trying to pan that to where I can see. I still can't see this dimension back here, so I may end up moving that just because I want my 1:1 scale to stay. So I'm going to lock that viewport so when I zoom in and zoom out it doesn't change. But since this one doesn't show, I can either try to force that in here a little bit more. I don't want it to be too crowded, but if I can get it in and it's okay and I can see everything, then that's fine. If not, if we can't fit that in, then we delete it from here and put it in the right side view. So what that would look like is, you know, basically just deleting it, unlock our viewport, pan that back over to where it's centered again, and lock it back, and then you can go ahead and put this dimension in the right side view if we need to. Okay, so either one of those ways would be correct. We still keep our 1:1 scale. Our viewport is okay. We're still pretty much centered up, but dimensions add a whole other aspect of, you know, how this looks on your paper space and your layout. Alright, so once we're happy with it, we'll, you know, make sure it's 1:1 scale, make sure it's locked. You can do a zoom extents out here just so whenever you're previewing this, it is okay to see the full preview of it. We'll go ahead and do a final save, and now you would be ready to print, put it in your portfolio, or upload it into the assignment link so it can be graded.